Hello everyone! Today I'm going to present a detailed and critical overview of the article Anxiety in the Cognitive Process of Learning English by teacher Paquito. This study is a fascinating exploration of how anxiety affects students' ability to learn English in a classroom environment, particularly focusing on 5 adult female learners in Mexico City. As we know, language learning is a cognitive process, but not only that, it's also an emotional one. This article focuses on foreign language anxiety as a type of affective filter that can drastically impact how well a student can process, retain, and produce language. The study uses a qualitative case study approach to uncover how this type of anxiety is experienced on a personal, classroom, and systemic level. Why is this important? Because language learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not just about grammar rules and vocabulary lists. It's also about emotions, self-perception, past experiences, and social dynamics. Anxiety in the language classroom can block comprehension, limit participation, reduce retention, and ultimately cause students to drop out of language programs entirely. Understanding how and why anxiety emerges is crucial for designing better learning environments. This study is unique in that it focuses on learners' first-hand experiences with anxiety based on what they actually said, wrote, and did in class. The study helps bridge the gap between theoretical definitions of anxiety and what it actually looks like in real classrooms. Let's define what we mean by language anxiety. In 1986, Horowitz, and Cope defined foreign language anxiety as a unique set of self-perceptions, beliefs, feelings, and behaviors related to classroom language learning. It includes fear of negative evaluation, communication apprehension, and test anxiety. Other researchers, like Tobias, propose that anxiety disrupts 3 cognitive stages of learning. First, the input stage. When students are introduced to new material, anxiety can reduce attention and cause shallow processing. Then, in the processing stage, anxiety interferes with working memory and mental rehearsal. Finally, at the output stage, when it's time to speak or write, anxiety can block retrieval and self-expression. McIntyre and Gardner in 1989 later expanded on this, suggesting that repeated anxiety episodes lead to a fixed anxiety response. Students begin to feel anxious every time they enter the classroom, even before they're asked to do anything. This study aimed to answer 2 central questions. How do students with anxiety perceive their own learning process in English? And what specific classroom aspects or dynamics make learning more difficult or stressful for them? By focusing on learners' voices, the study sought to identify not just symptoms of anxiety, but also the underlying causes that may not be visible through testing or teacher observation alone. The study focused on 5 adult women from Latin America, all enrolled in a first-level English class at a language center in Mexico City. They ranged in age from their early 20s to late 30s and came from diverse professional backgrounds: a lawyer, a biologist, a pharmacist, and 2 religious professionals. All had studied English before, some during school, others in language institutes, but had abandoned it for several years. Their motivations varied. Some were studying for professional reasons, others for school, and a few simply out of interest. Importantly, they all self-identified with adjectives related to anxiety. Words like nervous, introverted, insecure, and worried when completing a questionnaire designed to detect affective filters in language learners. To fully understand their experiences, the researcher used a qualitative case study approach, combining several methods over the course of 60 hours of class observation. This included questionnaires to identify students with anxiety traits, non-participant observation, watching classes without interfering to see how students behave naturally, student diaries, personal reflections on their classroom experiences, focus groups, group interviews where students discuss their feelings and frustrations, and individual interviews conducted informally to explore issues in more depth. This layered approach allowed the researcher not to track not just what the students said, but how their anxiety manifested in real classroom behavior. Let's now turn to what the study found. The first and most obvious finding was that all 5 students found English to be difficult, not just in general, but specifically because of pronunciation. They felt that the sound system of English was completely different from Spanish, and they lacked confidence in how they pronounced words. This fear made them hesitant to speak, especially in front of the class. Interestingly, they often blamed themselves rather than the curriculum or the teacher. They believed they lacked intelligence, memory, or dedication that their classmates had. This internalized belief created a loop. The more they believed they were incapable, the more anxious they became, and the less they participated. Another key theme was the feeling of comparison with classmates. Despite having similar or even more years of formal English instruction, these students perceived others as more fluent, more prepared, or simply better than them. They saw their classmates as confident, extroverted, and proactive, while describing themselves as shy, slow, or insecure. This sense of inferiority was reinforced whenever students had to speak out loud, especially during oral production tasks or vocabulary games. One of them even said, "I know I'm going to lose, so what's the point of trying?" This highlights how effective filters can become self-fulfilling prophecies. The student anticipates failure, avoids participating, and then learns less, confirming their own fear of incompetence. Many of the students trace their anxiety back to past negative experiences with teachers, especially in high school or middle school. Several recall teachers who mocked students for making mistakes, focused only on the best learners, or created environments where students were too afraid to ask questions. These early experiences left emotional scars and led to avoidance behaviors. One student, Elena, said her high school English teacher used to laugh at students who mispronounced words. Since then, she said she always felt like a cockroach hiding in the chair whenever English was spoken in class. These stories remind us that anxiety is often not born in the present, it is reactivated by it. One of the most revealing moments in the study came during a group discussion about passing to the board. Many students refused to go up to the board to complete exercises, even when they knew the answers. They described the experience as humiliating, exposing, and triggering. One student explained, "I don't go up to the board because I'm nervous. I'm not sure how to spell the words, and I don't always understand the instructions. Everyone is watching me. I freeze." This led to an emotional conflict in the group. Some argued that participation should be optional, while others said that the teacher should force everyone to participate, or they would fall behind. This discussion itself became tense and emotional, highlighting just how personal and complex this issue is. So, how did anxiety actually manifest in behavior? First, we have limited participation, in which most avoided volunteering even when they had the correct answers. Then, low verbal output. When asked to participate speaking, their voices were soft, hesitant, or unclear. Help-seeking behavior. They frequently asked classmates for help instead of asking the teacher. And finally, avoidance. They avoided eye contact, physically leaned away from the board, or distracted themselves during activities. Despite always being present and physically attentive, they remained passive participants. They watched the class unfold around without truly engaging in the task. From a cognitive perspective, the anxiety disrupted focus, recall, and confidence. They struggled with listening comprehension, even in simple tasks, often misunderstanding instructions or falling behind during activities. In speaking activities, they either read mechanically or didn't participate at all. Vocabulary games that relied on quick recall caused panic and silence. Emotionally, this led to feelings of frustration, shame, and helplessness, which compounded their reluctance to participate. By the end of the course, only 2 of the 5 students passed the final exam, barely, and just 1 continued studying English. This study confirms that anxiety is not a side effect of language learning, it is central to it. Emotional states like anxiety, fear, or self-doubt can block even the most basic cognitive processes like remembering words processing instructions, or forming sentences. And when the emotional climate of the classroom doesn't address these states, it allows them to take root. The findings also show that supportive teaching styles can help, but they're not always enough if the learner's anxiety is deeply rooted in past experiences. For teachers, the takeaway is clear. We must actively create low-stress environments where students can practice without fear. That includes allowing different forms of participation, giving anonymous or written response options, avoiding putting students on the spot, praising effort, not just correctness, normalizing mistakes as part of the learning process, and encouraging pair or small group work. But most importantly, we must listen to our learners. Their silence often says more than we realize. To close, I want to highlight one of the most important ideas from the article. The student's anxiety was not created in the classroom, but it was reactivated there. This means that addressing the language anxiety isn't just about fixing classroom practices. It's also about acknowledging the emotional history students bring with them. By understanding their stories, listening to their voices, and adapting our methods, we can help learners overcome one of the biggest barriers in language acquisition. Not grammar, not pronunciation, but fear. Thank you very much for listening.